Northern Ireland Affairs Select Committee, we have an evidence session on ending violence against women and girls in Northern Ireland. Welcome to the Minister Jess Phillips and to Deputy Director of the Interpersonal Abuse Unit, Gisela Carr. Minister, what was your current assessment of violence against women and girls across the UK and in Northern Ireland?
I mean, my current assessment and the government's assessment of violence against women and girls is that it is a national emergency. I'd say really specifically in relation to Northern Ireland, what the data shows us is the rates of femicide, so the murder of and domestic homicide is higher there than not just other parts of the United Kingdom, but quite a lot of the world. So look, it's a national emergency. I could give you the data around. It's about 10% of the population over 16 who reported suffering one of the many forms of violence against women and girls. So 5 million people. Which is a phenomenal amount, but our assessment is that it is a national emergency and an epidemic.
And the thing is, given so many levers are devolved,
a lot of this is devolved.
Exactly, I know, but this is a UK kind of wide UK government plan. Are you confident that you can have as much impact in Northern Ireland as you can have, for example, in England?
Well, I think that the violence against women and girls strategy, the vast majority of it is England and Wales, and even much of it is just England as well. There are parts of it because of the devolved nations. There are bits that are not reserved, so issues around immigration, and obviously one huge part of the strategy is around the online space and the safety of women online, and obviously that's not just not devolved to Northern Ireland. Actually, we have a role in the world, and that needs a global challenge. So I think that some of I feel confident that the violence against women and girls strategy and the government's plans on violence against women and girls in their broadest sense will have a positive effect on women in Northern Ireland. But undoubtedly, the kind of levers that we as members of Parliament get asked to pull, whether it's around funding for refugees, more police on the street, these things are all devolved. But I don't see any less care or attention being given to this fact by the Northern Ireland Executive, and so I don't think that they will do less well because then of the bits that they're not covered by in devolution, because they have their own executive who are responsible for those things.
You work with them. I mean, since you've been in post, you've visited Northern Ireland. You have engagement with the Northern Ireland Executive. But one of the things a UN committee said in 2019, referring to the UK, was that, and I'll quote this, the devolution of government powers do not negate the direct responsibility of the state party to fulfil its obligations to all women and girls within its jurisdiction. Yeah,
so, I mean, look, in 2019, obviously we lived in a slightly different time, thanks to many good people and campaigning. Obviously, laws in Northern Ireland with regard to abortion and the freedom of women over their own reproductive rights. I think that probably that 2019 report by the UN was almost certainly talking about the fracture between the UK and Northern Ireland in that regard. But look, there is undoubtedly a difference in how we have policy around lots of different issues of violence against women and girls. I'd say England and Wales are far more coterminous, largely because of our policing structures policing not being devolved within Wales. But in both Scotland and Northern Ireland, like that there is differences in education policy, there is differences in health policy. Like you say, I have been over to Northern Ireland and met with ministers over there, and our officials work with them very closely, regularly, and actually I count some of the women's sector in Northern Ireland as some of the greatest informants, if you will, for want of a better word, on what we should be doing. Funnily enough, I remember while we were there, an issue that would never ever come up for me in Birmingham, or would likely never come up for most people, around how one of the things that they had to give out and supply to people was heating oil, which obviously has become really, and that was something I had literally never heard of. And so making sure that our policies and understanding how we have to respond to different vulnerable groups across the UK is really, really important. But look, I don't fear that they don't care about it or that they are lagging behind in any particular area, but it is both different in Scotland and Northern Ireland.
Will you be able to provide then regular updates on progress against the strategy to include Northern Ireland as well?
Look, we have promised to do regular updates annually, and no doubt some of that will include issues in specific that cover Northern Ireland, anything to do with online, and how we know whether that is affecting the women of Northern Ireland. I have no doubt that will form part of the data, and also Northern Ireland women are included in the data gather. Halving violence against women and girls includes the women of Northern Ireland, so it's not like they're excluded from that particular data gather. So, but look, lots of the updates will be on progress on one of the 289, is it, policies? 259 policies, and the vast majority of them, I have to say, do not apply to Northern Ireland.
Okay. Gavin Robinson.
Thanks very much, Chair, and good morning, Minister. Good morning. You have mentioned engagement with Northern Ireland officials, and I know even personally you've been engaged with colleagues of mine, Cara Lockhart included, and the Natalie McNally case is going through the courts at the moment, which has garnered a lot of interest in Northern Ireland, and has been very topical over the last number of weeks, given some of the extraordinary issues at play in that murder trial. Whenever you've engaged with ministers, or at least officials have engaged with officials, and obviously your government published their strategy subsequent to the Northern Ireland Executive Strategy, do you see complementarity between them? Did you take any encouragement or initiative from the Northern Ireland Strategy? Do they complement one another?
Yes, is the answer to. So first and foremost, of course, we went over to Northern Ireland specifically to talk to them about the building of their strategy, how they had done it, what their outcomes that they were seeking to follow, and broadly, the outcomes are. They map across. So prevention, I'd say, is the single biggest focus of both that aligns. How you go about doing, like we dream the same dreams and want the same things, the journey is sometimes different. How you go about achieving that particular prevention is slightly different across the strategy, although not really. The focus on education is something that was in both. And actually, while I was in Northern Ireland, one of the most compelling sessions that I went to was with Women's Aid Northern Ireland, who'd done a piece of work with children who had talked about what they wanted to see in the strategy and what they wanted to be being taught in education. It had been totally co-designed by children in Northern Ireland. So absolutely, we took some of what they were doing. Also, we wanted to see an alignment across. It's no point them having a strategy that says, we're not going to bother with prevention, and us then saying, which would be a weird strategy to write, but I'd have some questions for them. But of course, we want to align, but recognise that situations and institutions are different across the nations.
Was there anything you thought in the Northern Ireland Executive Strategy that wouldn't work in England, or are there things that you have decided to proceed with that perhaps the Northern Ireland Executive Strategy didn't quite include because they hadn't the courage or
no, I wouldn't say that there was anything I disagreed with, and actually what I would really give credit to the Northern Ireland executive and those who built the strategy of making it incredibly victim centric and working with the voice of victims to really build the strategy. Where I think that they differ is just in the policies proposed to get on the same journey. But no, there is nothing in the Northern Ireland strategy that I disagree with. But what I heard, and it would be remiss of me not to say, what I heard from the organisations on the ground, whether that's for Women's Aid or like the families, as you say, who I met, those who had been victims of femicide, is that making sure that the nice words mean anything is always that's always the critical thing. So, but there's nothing that we disagree with.
I can say a little bit more about what we're doing with officials in the Northern Ireland Executive, if that's helpful as well. So we meet regularly as a 5 jurisdictions group. We last met with the Republic of Ireland as well, given the cross-border nature of some of the issues. So that we rep with that group regularly during the development of the strategy, and we've since met with them. I think the last meeting was on the 5th of February. One of the things we really want to do there is think about how we're working across all the devolved governments to align our strategic approach. I think my Welsh and Scottish colleagues wouldn't mind me pointing out that one of the things they've asked us to do is just wait till they're through their pre-election period ahead of elections in May, and then regroup to think about what our cooperation structure looks like going forward. But there's certainly an intention to continue that in a way that works across all of the devolved governments.
And I know from time that I spent behind the scenes in government, there are joint ministerial committees coming out of Cabinet Office ears. But there isn't one on ending violence against women and girls. Do you think that it would be useful to have a ministerial coordinating group across the devolved nations, rather than assuming that it's your responsibility to tap in or to check in from time to time with devolved nations, whilst also managing
look, we have an interministerial group on violence against women and girls. I do sometimes feel like they're coming out of my ears, though. I appreciate the
England. Is that an England minister, or is that across all the
it is in
nations?
England, but where there is relevance, that all the devolved nations ministers and because we've got meetings coming out of our ears, I don't want people coming to a specific meeting about education if it's completely devolved, for example. But in the last interministerial group we had on child sex abuse online, for example, the ministers from Scotland were on the interministerial group. Okay. So that is completely, that they are completely entitled, should it be relevant, so for example on stuff around immigration and online activity, that crosses the borders, that there's absolutely, we would encourage ministers from devolved governments to attend either the interministerial group on violence against women and girls or the interministerial group on child sexual abuse.
And just finally, I wonder how granular this becomes. From thinking of a case in my constituency, Rachel Simpson was murdered by a family member. I'm not sure it will come to trial, could come to trial, but throughout my involvement with the family pre-death and since, it is clear there are a huge number of feelings that are all part of a serious incident report, and that will publish at some stage, and I think it'll be alarming and depressing and startling for anyone who takes time to read it, about the number of government departments that failed, that led to this ultimate tragedy, and a tragedy for the family still, because it's still a loved one who's now in a hospital setting. That is obviously very specific, but every case, while we talk about this sometimes
not that specific,
every case has its own individual elements. Whenever I'm given an example of a case in my constituency which is going to have very specific feelings, are there lessons learned not just locally those who have failed, but also across the nation, so that you can take account of feelings and see, is there a direct application of change that could benefit people in England, Scotland or Wales?
Look, you make a really important point, and I'm not sure that historically, so obviously we have what was called the domestic homicide review system in England, and Wales actually are incidentally doing something slightly different, but it is in line with the government in England. And we have DHRs that are done. I know that in Northern Ireland, I think a similar DHR system, slightly more narrow than our DHR system, which has been expanded to include all domestic abuse-related deaths, including suicide. Whereas in Northern Ireland, I think it is still, since 2020, I think it is still focused very much just on your classic domestic homicide. And what we have identified is a lack of coordinated learning across what is done in England and Wales, because they don't actually, I think they're about to start, they don't actually have a domestic homicide review system in Scotland. So there is a patchwork across the nations in this regard. But I mean, the government, when I spoke in the House on Thursday, the government is committing to having an oversight mechanism of those reviews to ensure that actions are taken in what they're, the local areas or institutions, but also to make sure that learning can happen across. Now, actually, that system, making sure that it will work alongside the Welsh system. There isn't a similar system in Scotland, but it would be up to the Northern Ireland Executive to decide to have a similar oversight function. But any learning that we can have can only be a good thing. And as we set up what the oversight mechanism looks like, we will absolutely take that away.
Claire Hannah.
Thank you very much. Minister, Gavin touched on the interministerial group opportunity, and in your correspondence to our committee last year you said you'd welcome more mechanisms to be able to engage. Do you have the space to on an ongoing basis engage with the executive, but others as well? Women's Aid are at the centre of a lot of positive change on a number of issues in Northern Ireland, and I know you have a history and a relationship with them, but do you have the mechanisms that you need to be able to engage with them, with businesses, with the public, whoever you need to?
Look, I don't feel that if I say up to officials in the Home Office that I want to, how is this in Northern, that there is any barrier to ensuring that we can communicate with either the executive or the people in Northern Ireland. I have to say, I'm not just saying this because you're questioning me and you're all here. I think that the representatives here from Northern Ireland do a really good job of coming to me with cases in their constituencies and speaking to me about the issues and the barriers that they may be facing of all the political parties in Northern Ireland. I have found that to be the case. But what I would be concerned about, actually more so, is that they feel that they can reach me. It's not whether I can reach them, it's whether they feel that they can reach me. And of course, like anybody will know, when you're a member of Parliament, if people get in touch with you in real dire need or with really, really important things that they want to raise, and you don't have the power to deal with them, what I worry about is that what is devolved and what isn't devolved. It means that if say Women's Aid Northern Ireland come to me and I have to say, well, that's not me. And what I don't want that to do is create a relationship where they don't feel part of our strategy. So really, that would be a question for them, and I would want to make sure that they felt that they could definitely, that they feel that they also have those in Westminster, although I don't consider myself from Westminster, West Midlands, and half of me is from Northern Ireland, looking after them.
You mentioned briefly education, and obviously education policy is devolved. Are there good practices on relationships and sexual education that you think are useful in tackling this issue that maybe aren't in place in Northern Ireland, or is that something you've had an opportunity to explore?
Look, the answer to that question is I don't know, which is a rare thing for a person to say, is that, look, I think that there is brilliant practice and evidence-based practice that goes on across the United Kingdom and I don't know, some places in Northern Ireland may also have usually good local services coming up with schemes around healthy relationships. But one of the things that the Violence Against Women and Girls strategy commits to, and this will, although education is devolved, this will, I hope, benefit not just, in fact, yesterday I was meeting with groups of European countries, and I hope it benefits lots of people, is that the level of research into what works with both a universal sense of healthy relationship education, but also targeted on both victims and those showing early signs of perpetration. We are going to have to do some of that work because there isn't a huge body of evidence that says if you give kids this, like with maths or English, you would go, if you do this, we know that in 10 years' time, this many people will have an English GCSE. There is not the same. And there is far more learning, for example, on youth violence and knife crime because of investment over the years into studies in that. So we have got to find out. And actually, look, I could sit here and say I can think of brilliant schemes that are operating in schools that I really think work from my own anecdotal experience. And I, happy to suggest some that might be good for Northern Ireland, but actually I think it is the job of the government to look at what really works. Obviously we've rewritten the curriculum for English schools, and I think Wales had done it already, and making sure that schools are being tested against that curriculum is really important. Those two things are for the Northern Ireland Executive. However, I think that we're about to do the work finally to find out what actually works. And of course, no, maybe some of you, I don't know that any of us will live to see politically. I don't think we're all going to die straight away. We won't get the benefit of this we won't know whether these things have worked for quite some time, because actually if you stop boys turning into violent perpetrators, that's a longevity study.
It's longevity, but I think is that the education and the things that we're doing in schools now with young people is a big part of the strategy.
It's a huge part of our strategy. It's a big part of the strategy in Northern Ireland as well. Notwithstanding the difference in complexity, although not always that different, as somebody who has had people campaigning outside the schools in their constituency, notwithstanding understanding some of the complexities around the education system in a post-conflict society.
Thank you, Chair.
Do you want to come in?
Yeah, just about role models, if you don't mind. Maybe stealing somebody's thunder here. I don't know about prepared questions and all the rest. But whenever we did a visit in Northern Ireland, we went to Larne Football Club, and there was this white ribbon campaign, and there was some wonderful opportunities to encourage young guys, essentially, through role models and footballers they admire and look up to. I think that's been replicated in the GAA as well. We're seeing it very much. So I was going to ask you about the role of role models, how important you think it is for people that young fellas look up to.
Yeah, look, I
think it's... And then to set it beside this manosphere documentary I watched last week with Will Through and some ticky-tacky type idiot. And he was a balloon, but they were all balloons. So there are guys like that who are inspirational to young fellows, sadly.
Yeah.
And these great initiatives that we saw in Larne Football Club and other sporting organisations, and how useful you think they are.
I'm going to Sky Sports tomorrow, so I'll give you an idea of... and believe you me, I hope they're not going to ask me any questions about sport. Look, it's very, very important and a huge part of the government's strategy, especially when you're talking about post-16, really, opportunities for congregation. We don't just want to educate and prevent it happening in the future. We also have a problem in society today. And so, like, trying to reach congregations of people, maybe in Northern Ireland you have other sorts of congregation, but less frequent elsewhere. But so sports is a really, really, really important element of workplaces where lots of groups of men congregate, and so a huge part of the initial Enough campaign that was launched on the same day of the strategy was about sporting role models. It had like little and people in it. Now, I didn't see it, but my husband saw it absolutely loads, and because it was targeted at talking to men about what was and wasn't abuse, and how they could model good behaviours as well. So, look, it is really, really important, and part of the strategy is working with DCMS in partnerships around sports facilities, sporting sports events. The FA have been part of it. If I sound like I don't know what I'm talking about, it's because I know nothing about sport. And the truth of the strategy is that it will always be me who comes to talk about the strategy, and who's always the point is it shouldn't be me. It should be DCMS here talking about exactly what they're doing with regard to violence against women and girls and sport. And their part of the strategy is entirely about this role modelling issue that you have talked about.
And I can just to clarify on some of the points the Minister mentioned about those comms campaigns specifically as well. So we do have the Enough campaign is primarily England and Wales, but the partnership that we did with Sky Sports that the Minister mentioned that was very visible over the Christmas and New Year period.
Not to me, but to others.
That was something that was UK wide, and we worked with our colleagues in the Northern Ireland Executive on the comms side to make sure that they had full visibility of the plans and could link it up with their own comms campaigns as well. And it's certainly an area where I think we'd be really happy to do even closer join it.
Yeah.
On one of the events that I went to, I was invited by Ulster Rugby, and I accompanied Gavin Robinson, and it was really inspirational to see how they'd been spending UK government funding on creating spaces for girls and extra changing rooms. They wanted, not just for girls and women, but to be able to play and all be there together on the same day. They had enough pitches, they didn't have enough changing rooms, and there were numerous clubs that are embracing this, that it becomes a family affair. Look, it becomes that men and,
I think that it's
can
really,
play at the same
really
time as their sisters, and that is a cultural shift. Yeah. And I think to see that cultural shift in sport changes and improves relationships between men and women, and it really sets a good example.
I think it is. It's one of the most important things that I want to achieve with the strategy is the idea that it is your business, and for a sports club to say it, to recognise that for young women having to use the same changing areas as men after them, or like, it just immediately, it creates a barrier of, I don't know whether I can go there because I don't feel safe, and it will just be whether it's conscious or otherwise. And so for institutions to recognise their responsibility and do something about it, I pay absolute tribute to them for undertaking that work, because it just, we want to be thought about, just remembered that we exist, and that our safety and security feels different to what, you might be, I can imagine rugby clubs up and down the country who've made it so that if there are fights that break out in the bar, that there's not to cast aspersions. I know, Madam Chair, that you're very close to the rugby community. But I imagine they've given a lot of thought to the safety and security of men's behaviour with regard to other men, and just thinking about men's behaviour towards women, and how you can just do a few small things that make things safer for people. It's about that. It's about trying to make a cultural change, and the way it's manifested in government is to make a cultural change in different government departments, is to say, hang on, no, this is your responsibility, you take this away and you come up with what needs to be done. But that is the thing that will change this in the long term, is a changed culture, and not just thinking, it's the police's issue. It's the police's responsibility to pick up the pieces afterwards. Actually, if we can keep people safer and prevent things from happening in the first place, that would be much better.
It's a collective responsibility.
Good old Ulster rugby
They were
club.
excellent.
I shall try and visit.
Ballyhinch and Lisburn.
Oh yeah,
Where?
Ballyhinch and Lisbon. Yeah,
I shall start
that's where we went.
supporting them.
Ballymoney this Saturday, Minister.
Okay, right. I shall start supporting them. I've got no allegiance elsewhere in this sporting game.
Okay, moving on. Mike Kane.
Thanks, Minister. Great to have you. Thanks for being here today. I don't look at Twitter very often, but one of the accounts I do look at is Counting Dead Women, and Anne Raffy, one of my constituents, was added to that list just the other month. And I don't know. In all my time in public life, either as a councillor or an MP, I've seen huge changes in attitudes by the authorities in how this is dealt with. And I was wondering, is it working with police authorities, have some grasped the nettle better than others? Have you found with the new government it's still a little bit like herding cats when it comes to this policy area of work?
Yeah, of course. I think that look, there's a million priorities that people have, and I would be lying if I said that sometimes it wasn't challenging to make this be the priority that I would want it to be. But I have to say that the greatest ally in that has been the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister really understands and cares about violence against women and girls because of his hinterland in prosecuting the cases and changing systems to seek to prosecute the cases better, certainly with regard to sexual violence. But look, I recognise that in health there's a meningitis outbreak, and they have to that people's attentions can be very, very fractured. But I think fundamentally, from the centre, there was a real push for violence against women and girls to be made a priority in every single government department, and that is what has happened. So whilst maybe not herding cats, herding sometimes unruly puppies.
We've spent some time with the police service in Northern Ireland in recent months, and I've been impressed with the Chief Constable's language on this.
Me too.
From your perspective, how do you think they're doing?
Look, so I have met John Boucher a number of times and spent some time with the PSNI while I was over there. I was very impressed with some of the operations the really specific targeted operations that they were doing around sexual offending online and others. So I have no doubt. I mean, very, very early on in my tenure, John Boucher asked to speak to me, and I had a meeting with him very, very early on about him wanting to ensure that any good practice, for example, on Operation Soteria is a really good example of England and Wales Police Force operation. He wanted to make sure that they were keeping pace, if not advancing. So I agree with you. I mean, look, the police are completely independent of the Home Office, and the PSNI seemingly even more so, being as they are under the auspices of the Northern Ireland Executive. However, I call a spade a spade. I found him a decent man who cares about the right things.
Concur. Minister. Just a general and a specific question, if that's okay. One is around, do you think the PSNI have the resources? I mean, all police forces are struggling in some sense or other with resources. Does the PSNI have the resource it needs? And your correspondence to us in September did not commit to ring-fencing the funding for prevention for early intervention support services in Northern Ireland.
Yeah.
What was your thinking behind not doing that?
Look, so to the first question, obviously the PSNI, it's just sort of seemingly like a cop-out, isn't it? The PSNI budget is decided by the Northern Ireland Executive. Your broader issue around police funding is that I'd like the police to have the moon on a stick with safeguards attached. But look, the policing funding certainly in the UK and England has been increased by over £1 billion, and I believe that they also had increases for the PSNI, although that is not the responsibility of myself. Now, with regard to ring fencing, I don't think that you will find an issue that people don't wish to be ring-fenced by the UK government when funding is sent to Northern Ireland or redistributed back to Northern Ireland or Wales or Scotland. But it is devolved, and it's not for me to make the decisions of where funding is spent in Northern Ireland. It is for the democratically elected representatives to make that decision. And so if we ring-fenced violence against women and girls, believe you me, I'd like as much control as possible. This is I feel very, very, very uncomfortable saying what I'm about to say, because I would like to tell, I don't need to start at Northern Ireland. I'd like to tell Birmingham City Council what to do, but they are elected by the people in those areas. So if we did it with VAW, did it with care leavers, did it with, eventually Westminster is just running Northern Ireland then, or Scotland, or Birmingham City Council. It's very difficult to know where you begin and end on when you start ring fencing things. But look, Northern Ireland is run by 2 women. I don't doubt their desire to spend money on violence against women and girls, and their commitment to it, having interacted with them both on this issue. But I suppose that's a broader point about devolution. Don't get me wrong, I think that many of the systems in our country should just be me sat in a chair telling people what to do, but I'm not entirely sure that the nation would agree with you.
Thank you, Minister.
Don't know about that. Just for a day. Robin Swan.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thanks, Minister, for coming along. And maybe it does actually tie in just with your closing point there in regards to that. You've mentioned about other government departments' role in your strategy, but also recognising that the devolved nature of things. But you did refer to the post-conflict influence in Northern Ireland. The Northern Ireland Executive Office report, Every Voice Matters, said that the conflict in Northern Ireland actually continues to create an undercurrent of violence which often filters down to how women are currently treated, and I think that reflects to your earlier comments, and I do think it reflects back to the prevalence of violence against women and girls that we actually do see in Northern Ireland. Again, a study by Queen's University said that the norms that are permissive of violence before a conflict perpetuate violence after the conflict
Yep.
has ended. So thinking, and I think Simon had referenced earlier, in our earlier session about work that the previous committee had done about how women were treated during the Troubles, especially coercive nature, being forced to support paramilitary, support violence, provide cover, carry ammunition, all those things that are perpetuated down through anti-Northern Ireland society currently. So how does government, how does your role, your strategy actually account for the legacy of Northern Ireland's past in your violence against women and girls, both policy and strategy?
Yeah, look, it's a really important point, and it was one that while I was in Northern Ireland was raised with me on a number of occasions with regards certainly to the sort of the influence of paramilitarism still over women in Northern Ireland, and also the ability to trust, and and I use the word now on purposefully, like inform almost it, that like the sort of culture of being concerned about keeping people safe more broadly if you speak up about what has happened to you, and also a cause. Like when women are part of a cause, it's very, very easy for the cause to matter more than anything else, and you see that across various different manifestations. So look, like I think that because so much of the strategy does not apply to Northern Ireland, but the bit that does is the online element of it, that undoubtedly will have a different flavour as well in some of the abuse and violence and aggression, although as Gavin has pointed out quite clearly, like the manosphere is everywhere, that to make sure that is taken account of, some of the concerns around, for example, freedom of speech and concerns about sort of being able to have close contact, and those sorts of things will have to be taken account of in a completely different way in Northern Ireland, and made sure that people's feelings there about different controls are different. They just are, because people have lived under different controls that we take for granted as if it's nothing here. So that would absolutely, but look, to be perfectly honest, the strategies, because so much of what you would try and do in those cases would be around police and justice and education, those things are devolved to the executive. But I absolutely take away that funnily enough, what I felt when I was in Northern Ireland, as somebody who comes from an area where I have dealt with lots of forced marriage, lots of, for want of a better word, community-related and alleged cultural practices, the crossover between the experiences that the women spoke to me about and the sort of shame and the need to protect families and those sorts of things, they were I could have been talking to some of the women I've worked with who'd been forced married or victims of honour crime, and actually making sure that when we talk about honour crime, that we don't just think of it as being one community, and actually how honour-based abuse does definitely translate over to the situation in Northern Ireland, undoubtedly, because the issue about not speaking up because of political allegiances is about honour. It might not be the honour of your family, but there definitely is. There's so many echoes of the same sort of levers that are used over women.
Just to explore that, but what engagement are you having then with Northern Ireland Executive, Northern Ireland Women's Organisations? I'm thinking of TWN, Training Women's Network, people like that, because that message is very important in Northern Ireland. There was a campaign in regards to combating loan sharks.
With loan sharks?
Combating loan sharks in regards to school uniforms, Christmas present, it's all that. But again, loan sharks controlled and managed by paramilitary organisations. So getting the subtlety of the message you're saying translated into a Northern Ireland sensitive voice. Who are you working with?
So look, the reason I know about the issue of the paramilitarism is because I went and for Women's Aid and was presented with the research piece that they had undertaken with women in the community, and I said exactly what I say to you here to them. About looking at some of the strategies that we maybe have used in honour issues to try and tackle some of these. I'm not saying it's exactly the same, but I am saying that it felt very much like it had carryover. So look, I speak to the women's organisations and then I take those conversations into our conversations with the executive and with officials. But like you say, you have to have a Northern Ireland sensitivity. I hate saying this because it feels like a cop-out. It is the responsibility of the Northern Ireland strategy to make sure that they are taking account of that, and I have no reason to believe that they're not. Their strategy alludes to the post-conflict issue quite regularly.
Okay. Just in regard, you will know I have asked you in the Chamber in regards to the legacy bill that the Northern Ireland office is bringing forward, and the fact that sexual offences aren't specifically listed as one of the crimes that the Commission will look at in a historic nature. The work of the committee here has actually recommended that it should. Could I just ask your opinion in regards to, especially their session there about how coercive control, sexual control, rape was actually used as a weapon during the Northern Ireland Troubles? Do you think it should be included?
Look, I think that in a conflict society, if sexual violence wasn't used as part of it, it would be more of a surprise than if it was. In my experiences of conflicts around the world, of course, I think that that anyone who suffered sexual violence because of conflict should be taken account of. What I would say though is, in all my years of dealing with cases of sexual violence, that the idea that these cases are simple, have a linear storytelling applied to them, they do not, and making sure that it is as sensitive as it can possibly be. What I never want to set up and have seen it happen is systems that re-traumatise people for no end. So, but look, do I think that those women or men who suffered sexual violence as part of conflict deserve to have that story told and writ large? Absolutely, I do.
Okay. Simon, would you like to come in?
I just wanted to pick up, Minister, on the I wanted to echo what Mr. Swan was saying, but to pick up particularly on women from minority ethnic groups in Northern Ireland. Not a long-standing tradition of their presence in Northern Ireland, relatively recent as a result of Syria and other things. And a predecessor committee, we did quite a bit of work on this, and there was no doubting the interest in the Northern Irish authorities and policymakers to do as much as they could, but there wasn't a great bedrock of practical experience from which they could draw, given the novelty, if I can use that phrase, of those communities being present within Northern Ireland. I just wondered whether you might be able to say a word or two about your understanding as to how currently they are assessing that, and the appetite of those in Northern Ireland to reach out to policymakers and service deliverers in communities in GB who have got a much longer tradition and history of doing it, i.e. there's no need to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah.
Who can say,
come to Birmingham for the week.
Well, you could go to Birmingham, you could go to Cardiff, you could go to Wolverhampton, you could go to Coventry, you could go to a whole variety of places. And to sort of say, these are the things you should be looking out for, these are the questions you should be asking, these are the sort of signs. You don't have to start from ground zero.
So look, my broader knowledge of how well it's going in the broadest sense of having new migrant communities in Northern Ireland, I would have to say I am not sure. What I can talk about is the things that I am responsible for in that regard, both things that are in the Violence Against Women and Girls strategy, and I shall just breach beyond the border of that and say also the modern slavery contract also sits under my auspices. And whilst I was in Northern Ireland, I visited one of the providers of modern slavery services in Belfast. So the first thing I would say is that the migrant women's domestic abuse schemes, they operate for the whole of the United Kingdom. So the Home Office directly puts money into the Women's Aid partners there on the ground to provide that settlement support for migrant victims of domestic abuse within that. And as best I know from visiting it and visiting for Women's Aid is that it seemed to be operating incredibly well and also works very closely. To your point, it is run by a national partner that has a number of nation and regional partners. So where I live, it's Birmingham and Solihull Women's Aid, but it is run by Southall Black Sisters, who have, let me tell you, if you want to talk about a hinterland in race relations and making sure that people are working with migrant communities well, they would be one of the people that you would definitely call upon. So I know that they work with Southall Black Sisters on that contract. So that those connections do exist. Similarly, the modern slavery contract that we operate is operated across the nations and regions by the Salvation Army, and they work with lots of different partners. And now I'm not speaking as a minister, I'm speaking as a person who used to run that contract in my local area, and we all worked together around the commonality of things that we were seeing and learning. And I have to say, when I was in Northern Ireland and I was talking to a group of trafficked or abused migrant women, of which I spoke to two separate groups, I have to say, I felt coming away from it, they had more positive stories to tell than I might get from the same average group anywhere else in the UK. But that could have just, like when Ofsted comes and you send the naughty kids to Blackpool, I might have just got the cheeriest women to that they had brought along. I'm only too aware that as a minister, sometimes you get sent to see things that look good. But I investigated with the women around the hotels that they were living in or the accommodation. Like I know how to ask the right questions. And that, actually, I'd say if anything, they had felt welcomed. Of course, these things are often fractious, but I didn't get. I got a sense of an Irish welcome. Was what they had felt, and I felt pleased.
I mean, that's encouraging to hear. And final thing for me, which is we all know that it's much easier to deliver services and support in our urban areas, denser population.
Yes.
Notwithstanding the reserved and devolved balance, etc. Have you given any thought of an assessment to the levels of needed support and provided support for Northern Irish women in the rural areas,
communities,
not just the Belfast and the Derry London areas?
Look, I actually suppose this is one area where that you could really learn from what the Northern Ireland Executive may have done, because, like you say, it's lots of very rural parts of Northern Ireland, and I think that this comes down to when you push for changes on needs assessments. So much of the way that the strategy is built, whatever it is that gets devolved to whatever, whether it's a region or a nation, your police and crime commissioner or your Northern Ireland executive, the expectation is that it is done on a needs basis of that area. And to me, as somebody who comes from an urban area, the needs basis becomes very, very quickly obsessed and targeting at things like poverty rates. You know, I would think that, wouldn't I? Or migrancy rates because of where I live and my experience of operating services. Actually making sure when we are doing a huge piece of work with regard to the commissioning of victim services that is committed to in the strategy, that need for some people in less poor areas, although notwithstanding that quite a lot of the areas you're talking about in Northern Ireland will be poor as well, that need doesn't just mean that. It doesn't just mean the incidences of domestic abuse in your area. It also might mean you need a bus. Yeah. You need buses to be, I was sort of, you know, I'm still remain flabbergasted by people telling me things like that, you know, on the Isle of Wight, they have to, you know, to go to a sexual assault referral centre, they have to go on a ferry. And to me, that's absolutely alien. So making sure that when we set up here the commissioning frameworks, which obviously in Northern Ireland, they are responsible for the commissioning of those things, that we think about rurality as a need, rather that has to be part of a needs assessment, because I think that so much commissioning that is done in local areas is led by what governments have written as being their strategic document. And I just think that from what people, good members of Parliament, and it's good because I wouldn't know that, would I? Because my constituency isn't even 4 square miles, is that will be a need.
Mine's 440.
440? Greedy.
Right, I'm just very aware of time. I've got some questions on data that I want to ask you, and then obviously kind of like the online stuff is something we want to dip into as well, Minister. So basically, you know, we talk about data, about male violence against women and girls and the lack of equivalent data sets covering all 4 UK nations. Is the Home Office looking to address this on, you know, all 4 nations, having that oversight? Is that something that you're doing?
So, look, the data sets are different, and the overall strategy is assessed on the crime survey of England and Wales, and I stress that it is of England. Yes, no, but it's not. This isn't necessarily even a devolved issue. It is that different nations ask different questions for their own needs. So I suppose that is about devolution. I also recognise that people ringing up people and asking them certain questions about crime they might have suffered in a place like Northern Ireland, because of what we have discussed, maybe a slightly more complex, undertaking. So making sure that Northern Ireland women are included in the reduction. What I don't want to do is just reduce it everywhere else and show no progress in Northern Ireland, because actually it's a relatively small population and wouldn't dent my statistics that badly if all I was driving at was statistics, not outcomes. So how we make sure that when we are reporting against the overall target, there are sub-metrics that sit underneath it within the strategy, that there is a sort of equivalency that we can do in Scotland and Northern Ireland, and we are working with our counterparts over there to try and, but it will never translate over exactly. Go on, Gisela.
I was just wondering as well, does the Home Office, do they have methods that sufficiently capture data for under 16s as well?
No, is the answer to that question. But we are working with the because the Crime Survey of England and Wales, which for the first time we have put into a violence against, because prior to this it was domestic abuse, it was sexual violence, it was stalking. We have asked the ONS to do a piece of work that puts violence against women and girls into a category of all of those things together so that it can be monitored. But the crime survey in England and Wales, unsurprisingly, does not capture those under 16. So we are working with, so you have to look at other submetrics. You have to then go to issues around crime reporting, around educational statistics. And so we are looking to make sure with government departments and making them sweat their analytical teams about what data it is that they gather. So, for example, just off the top of my head, what schools data is gathered around young people who might be in relationships themselves. Also, there's a thing called Operation Encompass that is a data source where any domestic abuse incident will tell you about the children in that house and inform the school. But has that data ever been used to show how many under 16s are living in domestic abuse settings? Not to date. So it's about looking at the data that government already collects, whether that's here or in Northern Ireland. I don't want to dupe the stats. This is not about the overarching thing being made to look like it's halving quicker. It is about genuinely trying to find the different data sources that will help us make the policy that needs to be made. And that is not uncomplicated. In England and Wales fall together, where we have two other nations that collect data completely differently.
Talking about data, and it's already been brought up about counting dead women, but the femicide census, which I know you know well, I think what concerns me, that in the 2000 census, the matricides were 9% of the 2,000 women killed in the UK, on a par with stranger killings. Matricide, as we know, is when sons kill their mothers. The Northern Ireland matricides, though, are higher than stranger killings, and as a proportion are higher than the current average. I was just wondering, that I find deeply concerning. Does matricide feature in the Violence Against Women and Girls strategy?
So, child to parent, and by child, as somebody with two children, neither of whom are children, that child to parent violence absolutely features in the Violence Against Women and Girls strategy. I would say it is one of the biggest calls from the engagement that we did prior to writing the strategy, and certainly over the years I have seen a growing call, notwithstanding the seemingly uptick in matricide within the femicide data that you alluded to has been alarming. Also, the age range of those the femicide census records. I think in most people's heads, the average sort of victim of domestic abuse, for example, is sort of like a 30-year-old woman with a couple of kids. It's because that's what you see on EastEnders and things. Actually, it is at the extremities of those ages, both the young and the old, where the femicide census brings the issue really, really heavily to light. And I really thank them for their work on highlighting those particular issues. So look, it's absolutely in there, the issue of because to be perfectly honest, there isn't hardly any services around the country. You can't go to a refuge from your kid very often. Most people don't want to put their children into, if they are still children, into a care setting if they feel that they can't cope with them. And then if they are adult children, also people don't want to criminalise their children. That is a totally and utterly reasonable thing. So working with partners like Hourglass, for example, who deal with the older domestic abuse and abuse cases, like really looking at what needs to be done in this space for both those living with violent and abusive children who are children, minors, and at the other end is absolutely part of the strategy.
Okay, thank you. Claire Hannah.
Thank you very much. Minister, my colleague is going to pick up with you actions the UK government is taking to keep people safe online. But I wanted to ask about your assessment of online violence against women and girls in Northern Ireland and links you see between the online and offline worlds and statistics that you've spoken about.
I mean, the links between online violence against women and girls and offline, the first thing I would say is you don't need to prove that there is a link to know that, for example, child abuse online is child abuse. It is no less of an abuse if, and look, the most famous case of this was a case in Northern Ireland, the perpetrator in Northern Ireland abusing children all over the world, girls all over the world, including in Northern Ireland and here in England, to perform sexual acts. And I mean, in that case, one little girl took her own life, but make it really, really clear that for lots of victims, especially teenage girls who are victims of online sexual abuse, the sharing of their images, the sharing of videos of them, that even if no one has ever laid a finger on them IRL, they are victims of child sexual abuse, and actually overcoming that, and looking to the strategy and the work that we do on child sexual abuse to get schools to recognise that this is a victim of child sexual abuse, not a criminal, which has happened in lots of cases, is really, really important. It is a harm, it is illegal, and making sure that agencies who, I'm not here to defend how agencies respond to in real life rape. However, I'd say we have a huge long way to go, and I work with our Children's Minister, Josh McAllister, on that very, very regularly, in how do we make our sexual assault referral centres. So the strategy has a huge part around child sexual abuse centres being opened, I'm afraid to say, in England, not even Wales, in that regard. So look, but then to the online harm bit of it, there is also no doubt that online behaviours have led to, if you will, real world harm. If you look at surveys around, for example, strangulation, and the number of women under the age of 30 who cite being strangled in their sex lives, that it would be like, definitely doesn't say this in my briefing pack, that didn't exist when I was under 30. Like that is not normal. Women talk to each other. That was not normal occurrence. So you can't, I don't have the empirical data to say that strangulation pornography being quite so readily available has led to now 30% of women saying that or whatever. But I'm not an idiot. It seems like that's the likely the likely outcome. So then the government has to look at the kind of behaviours that it sees online and seek to stop. So the banning of strangulation, the criminalisation of strangulation pornography, being for that exact reason. But yes, so that it definitely leads to real world harms, but it is in and of itself harmful, and it is costing our nations billions of pounds.
Do you see a link between, I suppose, just online inane abuse and I suppose lack of consequence for that, and I suppose, and do you see a higher level of that in Northern Ireland that would correlate with higher levels?
I definitely
violence?
couldn't say whether I see a higher level of it in Northern Ireland, but I've not noted a place in the world that it doesn't exist. But look, I think that's why you have to do two things, and that's why the strategy sets out to do two things. One, which will have a very, very direct impact on Northern Ireland, one which Northern Ireland will go its own way, but also is undertaking, and that is you have to have an education piece to contextualise the sort of lack of, not just like, don't look at terrible, horrible, misogynistic men in the manosphere, but also like this lack of consequence isn't real. There is a consequence, and in your when you go to work, there's going to be a consequence for you. So there needs to be a, education piece that is done to contextualise an online world, and that's why the Department for Science and Technology, also as part of the strategy, are putting in place technical education makes me think of like drawing with a ruler when I was at school and doing woodwork. I'm not sure that they do technical drawing anymore, not making draftsmen anymore, they just do it on AI, making sure that parents and young people understand and can contextualise what they see online, but also that has to be fundamentally part of what we do in the education system. And then at the same time, you have to try and stop these things being consequence-free. Mm-hmm. They are not consequence-free for the victims of those crimes.
Thank you.
Hi, Minister. First off, I just want to say thank you for coming, but also the amount of abuse that you get online as just a given for talking at committees like this and the action that you're taking.
It'll be a day.
I don't want to underplay that, so thank you for coming to do that.
You're welcome.
I watched the Manosphere documentary, and what struck me was how evident it was even the individuals covered didn't sometimes believe even what they were saying, but that it was grifting and it was an ability to make money.
Yeah.
And it terrified me in terms of the radicalisation is happening every day of the young people that I meet, and they see these men as idols.
Yeah.
The Online Safety Act feels like we are already out of date, if I'm honest. Having watched what I watched and having what I've seen. So my question was meant to be about how effective do you think the Online Safety Act is going to be in reducing violence against women and girls? But my question is, how quickly do we need to update it? When do we need to do that? Because
it needs updating all the time, and is updated, and we will have the power to update it. So you can change the priority offences within the Online Safety Act already, and the government has sought to do that on various different issues around the naked images and what used to be called revenge porn, but yes, unsolicited, unwanted, unconsensual images of people, whether they're AI or not AI. So look, the government has the ability to create those priority needs that puts the onus on the platforms to do it. And where there are gaps, we will always fill them. But you're right, it's a bit like whack-a-mole, because they'll just invent a new harm. And
how do we rate our success, though, Minister? Like, how do we know if it's making a difference?
I mean, genuinely, like, if it were me, I'm a maximalist, and I mean, don't get me started on switch the internet off apart from Vinted. Not a policy of the government. I couldn't live without Vinted there.
As long as you keep eBay, I agree with you.
Okay, eBay, I'm happy to. You can amend my law and put eBay in. But the issue has got, like, the responsibility sits with the tech companies and the state. How successful do I think that we have been is an interesting question, because I would always want more. However, when I travel to other parts of the world or speak to our counterparts in other parts of the world, the Online Safety Act it's like you get a ticker tape parade for having it, I know, shocking, and I'm often there to be the person who says we need to go further, faster, and then people are like, oh, well, it's nice that you've got that. And when I look at some of the successes of the Online Safety Act that I genuinely doubted would come about, and I look at like a 77% reduction in traffic to Pornhub post the age verification, and I cannot help but think, great, well done. I don't think I expected to see that quite so fast. But then, of course, then you get the VPN issue, and so then the government has to legislate on the VPN issue. So we are always going to be playing catch-up until tech companies make it so that a violence and abuse of women and children doesn't, as you say, make a grift for somebody. It doesn't make money. We have to demonetize essentially the abuse of children. Look, I feel bad for womankind because it's always like let's get it done for children first, and then we'll get on to women, and we never get on to women. But I mean, the amount of monetisation I have seen of the worst ravages of paedophilia and child abuse would shock. So everybody needs to get their house in order and make sure that our laws are as robust as possible, so that can never happen to a UK child. And the Violence Against Women and Girls strategy commits for all the women in the UK, including Northern Ireland, that it will make it impossible for children to take naked images of themselves, to send them, and to receive them.
Yes, just a quick question specific about Northern Ireland. A lot of the responsibilities falls within the UK government, but you've talked very clearly about not wanting to take complete control of the issue. But there are actions and strategies being implemented on a local level by the devolved institutions. How do you, without being overbearing, make sure that that's in a coordinated way and is...
I mean, happy to take advice. I'm not sure I've ever not been overbearing in my entire life, but I'll give it a whirl. You do have to... It's funny, isn't it? Because I have definitely been overbearing on other government departments. To Mike's question earlier, I've definitely been overbearing and intolerable, I'd say, at certain points. And there is an element where the devolved executives, almost like they are another government department that I would be being overbearing on and saying, well, you're not doing enough, you're not doing it. It isn't the same. Yeah. That isn't the same. It isn't the same relationship, and nor should it be, because one is are democratically elected by the people of those areas. It is not for me to tell them what they should and shouldn't do. But on the issues where there is crossover, I have to say, if anything, my experience is that they ask for... So the Domestic Abuse Protection Orders is a really good example of... and I had conversations with them. It's in UK legislation. It is also in Northern Ireland's legislation, and them getting it set up. I don't feel like me going, well, you should be doing the depots, do them quicker, recognising their court delays, their policing issues, recognising that things are different. But actually, the alternative is true, is they come to us and ask us to set up things so that they can come and learn. So I don't know that they think I'm overbearing, but you'd have to ask them.
Can I just give one example and then I'll finish? You mentioned in your evidence to the committee via letter about trying to extend the revenge porn helpline to Northern Ireland.
Yeah.
Is that an example of where there's been progress being made, or...?
I'm going to turn to Gisela.
Yeah, of course. So at the moment, the Home Office funds the Revenge Porn Helpline to provide services in England and Wales. And what that effectively means for Northern Ireland is that they don't advertise their services in Northern Ireland because the funding is linked to England and Wales because of the devolution arrangements. It comes from the Home Office. However, if somebody finds that if a victim in Northern Ireland searches and finds the number of the helpline and rings them, the helpline will provide them with support.
The same service.
I think it's worth saying we've seen an increase, as you would not be surprised to hear, in demand on the revenge porn helpline. We uplifted their funding to try and meet some of that demand, and it's certainly an area where we'd be really willing to have conversations and would welcome the opportunity to have conversations with our colleagues in the executive about how we might extend the funding provision for victims across the whole of the UK. But at the moment, that's how the arrangement works.
Right now, though, sorry, just that's really interesting.
Yeah.
But so basically, if they find the number, they can ring it and get support. But we
hard
don't
to find.
But we don't actively go out and promote it because, you know, there was 100 odd cases the PSNI. So, but we don't actively promote it within Northern Ireland because it's
No, we don't. But yeah, like, to be clear, like, I mean, as somebody who the Revenge Porn Helpline have taken down my images, like, nobody's going to say, no, we're going to leave your images on the internet because you're from Northern Ireland. That's not how these institutions were formed. But yeah, I mean, look, those broader conversations about with those executives about how we put that onto a much stronger footing, for example, with the commitment to a 48-hour takedown of those images, so that it isn't just a one-off to take down an image after 48 hours, so that those images can be hashed, and then all platforms like the system is, I would say, about to get more advanced, and so broader conversations will have to be had about like how we're going to make sure that we fund that across the piece. Funnily enough, in child abuse, it's not government funded usually. It's polluter pays, so it's funded by the tech companies.
I do have additional questions, Minister, which I will put to you in writing. But I'd like to thank you.
The tea room?
Absolutely. But I would like to thank you for the work that you have done since being in post with agencies in Northern Ireland and with the Northern Ireland Executive. And while a lot of things are devolved, we appreciate this is a UK-wide strategy and we thank you for your work. Order, order.